The bell above the door of Antonio's diner chimed its soft, tinny song, but the man who stepped through seemed to silence it. The evening air, warm and smelling of garlic and baking bread, grew still. Caroline, balancing 3 heavy plates along her arm, felt the shift before she saw the cause. He was there again. The man in the dark, expensive-looking coat. For 2 weeks, he had been her mystery. He arrived like clockwork just as the sun began to dip below the city skyline, claiming the same shadowy booth in the corner. He never spoke beyond ordering a black coffee and the evening special. He never smiled. He would pull a sleek laptop from his leather bag, his long, elegant fingers tapping silently, his presence casting a chill over his small section of the warm, noisy restaurant. The other waitresses called him the ghost and gave his table a wide berth. But Caroline was different. She was a dreamer, and in the quiet, serious man, she saw a story she desperately wanted to read. Tonight, the restaurant was a whirlwind of clattering dishes and laughing families. Caroline, her feet aching, navigated the chaos with a practiced smile. Her eyes, however, kept drifting back to the corner. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and thoughtful, as if he were a king surveying a kingdom that bored him. A single lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and for a foolish second, she thought about brushing it back. Shaking her head at her own silliness, she picked up a pitcher of iced water to refill drinks. That's when it happened. The inciting incident was not a grand crash or a dramatic scene, but a simple, clumsy moment. As she moved past his table, her hip bumped the edge, just enough to jostle her arm. A wave of cold water sloshed from the pitcher, cascading over the rim and onto his table, splashing his sleeve and the polished screen of his laptop. Time froze. Caroline's heart plummeted into her stomach. "Oh, I am so sorry," she gasped, her voice trembling. She grabbed a stack of napkins from a nearby station, her hands moving in a frantic, panicked dance. "I'm so clumsy. I didn't see. I'm so sorry, sir." She expected cold anger. A sharp word. A demand for the manager. This laptop probably cost more than she made in a month. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. But the anger never came. Instead, a large, warm hand gently covered her fluttering ones, stilling them. The contact was like a jolt of electricity. Her eyes snapped up to meet his. He wasn't looking at the mess. He wasn't looking at his wet sleeve. He was looking directly at her. His eyes were a deep, stormy gray, and in them, she saw not annoyance, but a startling intensity. It was a look that saw right through her uniform and her apology, straight into the very core of her. It was a look that held her captive. "It's just water," he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble that seemed to vibrate in the space between them. It was a voice meant for dark rooms and secrets. "But your laptop," she whispered, her own voice barely audible. "Is fine," he assured her, his thumb making a subtle, unconscious stroke against the back of her hand before he pulled away. The spot where his skin had touched hers tingled. He took a napkin from her frozen grasp and calmly dabbed at his sleeve. His gaze never left her face. "It's you I'm concerned about. You're working too hard." No customer had ever said anything like that to her. They complained about slow service or cold food. They didn't notice the person serving them. Yet, in the middle of his own minor disaster, he had noticed her. A strange, warm courage bubbled up inside her. She offered him a smile, a real one this time, not the polite, professional one she gave all the other customers. It was a smile that lit up her whole face, reaching her eyes. "It's my job to work hard," she said, her voice steadier now. "But thank you." Something flickered in those stormy depths of his eyes. It was like lightning in a distant cloud, a quick, bright flash of surprise, and something hotter, something far more dangerous. It was a look of pure, unguarded attraction. It lasted only a second before a wall slammed down behind his eyes, but she had seen it. She had felt it. He stood up abruptly, pulling a few bills from his wallet and placing them on the table, far more than enough to cover his meal. "I should go," he said, his voice now tight, as if he were fighting with himself. Caroline could only nod, her mind still reeling from that single, electric glance. He walked towards the door, his tall frame moving with a powerful, controlled grace. The other diners seemed to fade into a blur around him. Her heart was pounding a wild, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't want him to leave. She wanted to run after him, to ask his name, to ask what that look had meant. As if he had heard her silent plea, he stopped just as his hand touched the door handle. He turned back. His eyes found hers across the crowded room, and it felt as if they were the only two people in the world. The noise, the smells, the lights, everything melted away, leaving only the magnetic pull between them. He took 2 slow steps back towards her, close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, like sandalwood and rain. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a husky, intimate whisper meant only for her ears. The words were a caress and a warning, all rolled into one. "You have a light inside you," he murmured, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "It's the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long, long time." He paused, and the air grew thick with unspoken feeling. "And that is exactly why you should stay away from me. A man like me, I wasn't made for light. I would only end up burning you." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out the door, disappearing into the twilight. Caroline stood rooted to the spot, the damp cloth still clutched in her hand. Fear should have been her first reaction. A normal person would have been frightened by such a strange and dramatic warning. But Caroline wasn't frightened. His words, meant to push her away, had done the opposite. They had drawn her in. They were a challenge. A mystery. A forbidden door he had just dared her to open. "For you," she thought, her gaze fixed on the empty doorway. And what happens when a man who lives in the dark finds himself craving the light? The thrill that shot through her was as undeniable as it was dangerous. He thought he could control the pull between them. He thought a warning would be enough. But as Caroline felt the lingering warmth on her hand and the ghost of his whisper in her ear, she knew with a certainty that shook her to her soul that he was wrong. This was only the beginning. The warning should have built a wall between them. Instead, it built a bridge, one made of stolen glances and charged silence. For 3 days, Frederick did not return to the restaurant. Caroline moved through her shifts like a ghost herself, her eyes constantly darting to the empty corner booth, her heart sinking a little more with each passing hour. Had his control won? Had he successfully talked himself out of the temptation she represented? On the 4th evening, the bell chimed. Caroline's head snapped up from wiping a table, her breath catching in her throat. There he was. He looked the same, dark coat, serious expression, but everything was different. This time, his stormy eyes found hers the moment he stepped inside, holding her gaze with a deliberate, unflinching intensity as he walked to his table. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was there for her. He came every night after that. He never said much, but his presence was a constant, humming energy in the room. He would order his coffee, and when she brought it, his fingers would deliberately brush against hers as he took the cup. A simple touch, but it sent sparks shooting up her arm. He left extravagant tips, folded notes with them. They weren't love letters. One night, it was just a sketch of the moon. Another, a single word. Soon. The tension between them became a living thing, thickening the air, making it hard to breathe. It was a silent game of push and pull, and Caroline was utterly captivated. The breaking point came on a Friday. The restaurant was closed, the chairs upturned on the tables. Caroline was exhausted, counting the till when a soft knock echoed through the quiet dining room. Her heart leaped. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, who it was. Frederick stood under the flickering street lamp, his hands buried in his coat pockets. The rain from earlier had left the pavement glistening, reflecting the city lights like 1,000 scattered stars. "My car is around the corner," he said, his voice low and steady, no trace of a question in it. It was an invitation, a statement of fact. "Walk with me." She should have said no. She should have cited policy, or safety, or simple common sense. Instead, she simply nodded, grabbed her coat, and turned off the lights, stepping out into the cool night to meet her fate. They didn't take his car. They walked. For hours, they wandered through the sleeping city, through parks where the only sound was the rustle of leaves and their own footsteps. The invisible wall between them crumbled with every shared confession. He told her about the family business, a world of old money, suffocating traditions, and a future that had been mapped out for him since birth, a future that felt like a gilded cage. They have a list, he said, a bitter edge to his voice. The right families. The right connections. My life is not my own. It's a transaction. In return, she told him about her dreams that stretched far beyond the restaurant walls, about the small journal she kept filled with stories of places she wanted to see, and a life filled with genuine feeling, not just duty. You're so free, he murmured, looking at her with a kind of awe. You have no idea what a miracle that is. Their hands, swinging at their sides, brushed together. This time, he didn't pull away. His fingers laced with hers, strong and sure, and it felt like coming home. The simple act of holding hands had never felt so intimate, so scandalous, so right. He led her to a small, hidden garden, a secret pocket of beauty tucked between two old buildings. The moon, full and bright, bathed everything in a silvery light. They stopped beside a stone fountain, the gentle trickle of water the only sound. Caroline, he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she could now name longing. He lifted his free hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. His touch was impossibly warm, sending shivers through her entire body. She leaned into his palm, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. I tried, he said, his face so close she could feel his breath on her lips. God, I tried to stay away. I told myself it was for your own good. But I can't. I can't control myself around you. You are all I think about. That was all the permission she needed. She rose onto her toes, closing the small, breathless space between them. Their first kiss was not gentle or hesitant. It was a collision, a release of all the weeks of tension, all the stolen glances, all the unspoken words. It was a kiss full of fire and longing, a desperate claiming. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his solid frame, and she melted into him. One of his hands slid from her back to tangle in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, while the other splayed firmly against the small of her back, holding her possessively close. It was spicy and deep, a kiss that spoke of lonely nights and a desperate, shared hunger. It tasted of coffee, of rain, and of pure, undiluted want. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes dark and blazing with an intensity that made her knees weak. This is a secret, he breathed, his voice husky. My world, they can't know about you. You would become a target. A weakness they would try to remove. Instead of frightening her, his protectiveness ignited a fierce warmth in her chest. Then it will be our secret, she whispered back, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. And so, their secret, intense romance began. It was a world built in the shadows. Late-night drives in his luxurious car, windows down, her hand in his. Passionate, breathless kisses in elevator cars, believing for a few stolen seconds they were utterly alone. He would wait for her in his car down the street from the restaurant, a silent, powerful sentinel. She would slip inside, and he would drive them to a quiet lookout point over the city. There, they would talk for hours, but more often, they would simply touch, exploring this new, intoxicating language of their bodies. His hands learned the curve of her waist, the slope of her neck. Her fingers traced the strong line of his shoulders, the surprising softness of his hair. Every embrace was warmer, every kiss was longer and more daring than the last. The electricity that had sparked between them from the very first day now crackled constantly, a live wire of desire and deep, growing affection. He was a man used to commanding everything in his life, but with her, he was learning to surrender. And she, a girl who followed the rules, was learning the thrilling power of breaking them for a love that felt once in a lifetime. He was her dangerous secret, and she was his stolen, precious light. And in the dark, away from prying eyes, they both knew they were falling, fast and hard, with no thought of ever finding their way back up. The secret world Caroline and Frederick had built began to feel the pressure of the real one. It started subtly. Frederick's phone would buzz with a specific, harsh tone during their late-night drives, and he would let it go to voicemail, his jaw tightening. The shadows under his eyes deepened. During one of their embraces in the quiet of his car, she felt him flinch, and when she pulled back, she saw a new worry in his beautiful, stormy eyes. "They're insisting I attend more functions," he finally confessed one evening, his voice tight. They were parked at their usual spot, the city lights twinkling far below like a bed of diamonds. He stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Galas. Dinners. They're presenting me with potential partners. Women from suitable families." The word partners struck Caroline's heart like a physical blow. She had known this was coming, but hearing it aloud made it terrifyingly real. The gilded cage he described was rattling its bars, demanding its occupant return. "What did you tell them?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to her then, his gaze fierce. "I told them I wasn't interested. But it's not a request, Karen. It's an expectation. To them, my life is a business merger. My happiness is irrelevant." For the next week, a cloud hung over them. Their kisses became more desperate, their holds tighter, as if they were both trying to memorize the feel of the other before it was ripped away. Caroline could feel him being pulled away, tugged by the invisible strings of duty and a last name that felt more like a chain. The fear was a constant, cold knot in her stomach. Was their beautiful, secret love story destined to be a tragic one? Then, one Tuesday night, he was waiting for her after her shift, but he wasn't in the car. He was standing by the passenger door, a single long-stemmed white lily in his hand. His expression was different. The worry was gone, replaced by a calm, unshakable resolve. "Get in," he said, a small, sure smile playing on his lips. "We're not going to our usual spot." He drove out of the city, the buildings giving way to rolling hills and a sky crowded with stars. He was quiet, but his hand rested on her knee, his thumb drawing slow, calming circles. He wasn't pulling away, he was leading her somewhere. Finally, he turned down a narrow, tree-lined lane, stopping before an ornate, wrought iron gate. He entered a code, and the gates swung open silently, revealing a breathtaking, private garden. It was a hidden paradise. Moonlight dripped from the petals of blooming night-blooming jasmine, filling the air with an intoxicating sweetness. A path of smooth, white stones led to a gazebo draped in wisteria, and a small, crystal-clear pond reflected the full moon like a perfect pearl. It was a world away from everything, from the noisy restaurant, from the pressures of his family, from all the shadows. He led her to the center of the garden, under an ancient, sprawling oak tree. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the frantic beating of her own heart. He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. His eyes, in the moonlight, were pure silver, blazing with a love so raw and powerful it stole her breath. "For my entire life," he began, his voice strong and clear, "I have been told who to be. My path was laid out for me before I could walk. I was taught to control everything, especially my heart. I was told emotion was a weakness." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles, his gaze never leaving hers. "And then I met you. A waitress who wasn't afraid of a brooding stranger. A woman with a smile that could power cities and a spirit so bright it burned away all the gray in my world." Tears welled in Caroline's eyes, glistening in the moonlight. "You were the one thing I could never control," he continued, a hint of that old, delicious danger in his voice. "My love for you was an explosion. It was messy and overwhelming and the most real thing I have ever known. You didn't just walk into my life, Caroline. You stormed it. You laid claim to a heart I didn't even know was still beating." He let go of her hands and slowly, reverently, lowered himself to one knee. From his pocket he pulled out a small, black velvet box. When he opened it, Caroline's breath hitched. Nestled inside was a stunning, elegant diamond ring that sparkled with a fierce, brilliant fire. "They can have the business," Frederick said, his voice thick with emotion. "They can have the name, the money, the empty legacy. It all means nothing. You are my freedom. You are my future. I choose you, and only you, forever." He looked up at her, his entire soul laid bare in his eyes. "Caroline, my love, my light, Will you marry me? Will you leave this old life behind and build a new world with me? A world that belongs only to us. There were no words. There was only a feeling, a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy that washed away every fear, every doubt. She dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands cradling his face. Yes, she breathed the word, a promise, a prayer, a new beginning. 1,000 times yes. The kiss they shared then was different from all the others. It wasn't a kiss of stolen passion or desperate longing. It was a seal, a vow. It was soft and deep and filled with the profound, unshakable peace of two souls who had finally, completely come home. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. As they held each other under the starlit sky, wrapped in an embrace that promised a lifetime of tomorrows, the last of the shadows melted away. He had chosen her. Not duty, not tradition, but her. And in doing so, he had given them both the greatest adventure of all, a forever, built not on a name, but on a love so powerful, it had rewritten both their destinies. We hope you were captivated by Caroline and Frederick's unforgettable love story. If this tale of a powerful man brought to his knees by love captured your heart, then imagine the other romances waiting for you. Subscribe to our channel now, and never miss a story where passion defies all odds. Their forever started with a choice. What would you have chosen? Let us know where in the world you're watching from and share your thoughts on their dramatic, spicy romance in the comments below. We love reading every single one. The restaurant, Il Paradiso, was a temple of quiet power. It was Fabrizio's place, and everyone knew it. The air smelled of rich garlic and expensive wine, and the only sounds were the soft clink of silverware and the low, respectful murmurs of his men. Fabrizio sat in a velvet booth, a king on a throne of shadows. He was a man carved from stone and silence, his eyes holding storms no one dared to weather. His hands, one resting on the table, the other holding a glass of dark red wine, were marked with the faint silver lines of old battles. He was the boss, the capo, the most feared man in the city, yet in the quiet of the evening, a deep loneliness clung to him, a coldness that had settled in his bones. This quiet was about to be shattered. The first sign of trouble was a scuffle at the heavy oak doors. Raised voices, sharp and surprised. Fabrizio's head lifted slowly, his dark eyes narrowing. His bodyguards, mountains of men in tailored suits, shifted, their hands moving inside their jackets. Before anyone could stop it, a small, desperate blur shot between them. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8, with messy brown hair and eyes wide with pure terror. His chest heaved, and tear tracks gleamed on his dirty cheeks. He scanned the room, his panicked gaze skipping over the shocked faces of the grown-ups until it landed on Fabrizio. He didn't see a monster or a king. He saw the biggest, most important person in the room, the one who could fix things. "Sir, please, sir." The boy, Andrew, ran straight for the booth. One of Fabrizio's men, a giant named Rocco, moved to block him, but Fabrizio raised a single finger. The man froze. The room held its breath. Andrew didn't stop. He crashed into the side of the booth, his small hands clutching the fine, expensive fabric of Fabrizio's suit jacket. His grip was surprisingly strong, desperate. He looked up, his young face a mask of utter despair. "They're hurting my mom," he cried, his voice cracking with a pain that was too old for him. "These bad men, they came to our house. They're yelling and they pushed her. You have to help. Please, you have to." Fabrizio looked down at the boy. He was used to people begging, to grown men weeping and pleading for their lives. But this was different. This wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a plea for salvation for someone else. The boy's bravery, running into a den of wolves to save his mother, was a spark in the dark, cold cavern of Fabrizio's heart. He saw no fear of him in the boy's eyes, only a fear for his mother. It was a feeling Fabrizio understood, a loyalty that ran deeper than blood. For a long, heavy moment, Fabrizio said nothing. He could have had the boy thrown out. It was the sensible thing, the safe thing. But the spark had taken hold. He placed his wine glass on the table with a quiet, final click. He stood up, unfolding his large frame to its full, intimidating height. He didn't look at his men, he didn't need to. They were already moving, a well-oiled machine responding to its master's unspoken command. He looked down at the boy, whose tiny hand was still fisted in his coat. "Take me to her," Fabrizio said, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. The journey to the small, run-down apartment building was a silent, speeding blur in Fabrizio's black car. Andrew sat beside him, pointing the way, his little body trembling. Fabrizio stared out the window, the city lights streaking past. He never got involved. He was the storm people hid from, not the shelter they ran to. Yet here he was. The car screeched to a halt. Even from the street, they could hear the shouting, angry, male voices, and the sound of something breaking. Andrew whimpered, pointing to a second-floor door. Fabrizio was out of the car before it fully stopped, his men flowing out behind him like a dark tide. He took the stairs 2 at a time, a predator drawn to the chaos. The door to the apartment was splintered, hanging off one hinge. Inside, the scene was one of pure violence. 2 large men were towering over a woman, their faces twisted with ugly anger. One had her wrist in a brutal grip, while the other was gesturing wildly, threatening to break the few precious things she owned. But the woman, Claudia, was not broken. She was fighting. She was a storm of her own, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, wild light. She was trying to yank her arm free, her other hand balled into a fist, pounding uselessly against the man's thick shoulder. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice raw with fury and fear. "Leave us alone." She was the most beautiful thing Fabrizio had ever seen. Her hair was a cascade of dark honey, tangled from the struggle. Her simple dress was torn at the shoulder. She was terrified, yes, but she was not defeated. She was a lioness, small and cornered, but ready to fight to the death for her cub. In that single, heart-stopping moment, Fabrizio felt something shift inside him, a tectonic plate of emotion he thought long frozen. It was more than pity. It was a shocking, powerful pull, a recognition of a spirit as strong as his own. The 2 thugs finally noticed the new presence crowding the doorway. Their smug faces drained of color when they saw Fabrizio. They knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. The one holding Claudia's wrist let go as if her skin had burned him. Fabrizio didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, filling the broken doorway, his gaze locking onto the 2 men. It was a look that promised an end to all things. It was cold, absolute, and final. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Rocco. That was all it took. His men moved in, their efficiency chilling. They didn't ask questions. They didn't throw punches. They simply enveloped the 2 thugs, their hands like vices on their arms, and began to usher them out. The men didn't struggle, they were too paralyzed by fear. They knew they were being taken away, and they would never be seen again. The problem was being erased. As his men cleared the space, Fabrizio's attention returned to Claudia. She was breathing in ragged gasps, clutching her bruised wrist to her chest. Her son, Andrew, ran to her, burying his face in her dress. She held him close, her hands shaking as she stroked his hair, her eyes never leaving Fabrizio's. The noise and the violence were gone, leaving a ringing silence in the wrecked apartment. Slowly, Claudia lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, were wide with shock, with fear, but also with a dawning, overwhelming gratitude. In their depths, he saw the reflection of his own solitary life, and for the first time, it looked empty. She took a small, shaky step towards him. "Thank you," she whispered, the words trembling in the air between them. In that single, electric look, a connection was forged. It was a spark that jumped the gap between his world of shadows and her world of light. He was the king from the dark, and she was the queen of a broken castle. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he would burn the whole city down before he let anything hurt her or her boy again. The question that hung in the air, the cliffhanger that left the audience breathless, was not if he would protect her, but how far this newfound, dangerous connection would go. The car ride to Fabrizio's home was wrapped in a thick, heavy silence. Andrew, exhausted from his fear and tears, fell asleep almost instantly, his head resting against his mother's side. Claudia held him close, her body still trembling with the aftershocks of the attack. She stared out the tinted window, not seeing the city lights, but replaying the terrifying moments in her mind. The man sitting across from her, a silhouette of immense power in the dark interior of the car, was a complete mystery. He had saved them, but what did he want? When the car finally glided through tall, iron gates and up a long, winding driveway, Claudia's breath caught in her throat. Fabrizio's house wasn't just a house. It was a fortress, a beautiful, modern castle of stone and glass, hidden away behind high walls. Lights glowed warmly from within, but the sheer size of it was intimidating. "You will be safe here," Fabrizio's voice cut through the quiet, deep and sure. "No one can get to you behind these walls. You have my word." His word. It felt like the most solid thing she had ever held. The first few days were a strange, quiet dance. They were given a beautiful suite of rooms with soft beds and a window that looked out over a sprawling, moonlit garden. Fabrizio was like a ghost in his own home. Claudia and Andrew would see him sometimes, a shadow moving down a hallway, a broad-shouldered figure standing on a balcony, always surrounded by an aura of unapproachable strength. He was providing for them, protecting them, but he kept a careful distance. The first crack in his armor appeared because of Andrew. The boy, naturally curious and resilient, had lost his fear of the big man. One afternoon, he found Fabrizio in his vast, book-lined study, staring at a roaring fire. Andrew stood in the doorway, clutching a toy car. "Mr. Fabrizio?" he said, his small voice echoing in the large room. "Why is your house so big if it's just for you? It must get lonely." Fabrizio turned, and for a moment, Claudia, who had been frantically searching for her son, saw a look of pure, unguarded shock on his face. No one, ever, had spoken to him with such innocent honesty. He didn't get angry. He simply looked at the boy, and then at Claudia hovering nervously behind him. "It is big," Fabrizio agreed, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Perhaps it needed some noise. From that day on, the ice began to melt. Fabrizio started joining them for dinner. At first, the meals were quiet, formal affairs. But Andrew's chatter about his day, his toys, his dreams, slowly filled the silence. Claudia watched, amazed, as the feared mafia boss began to ask her son questions, truly listening to the answers. He started to leave small gifts, a new set of colored pencils, a puzzle, a book about knights. He was learning how to care, and the sight of this tough, dangerous man being gentle with her son made Claudia's heart feel too big for her chest. One night, after Andrew was safely tucked in bed, Claudia found Fabrizio on the terrace overlooking the dark garden. The air was cool and sweet. "Thank you," she said, leaning on the railing beside him, "for what you're doing for him. He hasn't had a man like you in his life." Fabrizio was silent for a long time, staring into the darkness. "I have not been a man like this in anyone's life," he confessed, his voice low. He told her then, in bits and pieces, about his own past. A childhood without warmth, a life built on power and fear, a climb to the top that left no room for softness. He spoke of a loneliness so deep it had become a part of him. And Claudia, in turn, shared her story. She spoke of Andrew's father, a man who had promised the world but delivered only disappointment and then disappearance. She spoke of her struggle, working 2 jobs, constantly looking over her shoulder, trying to be both mother and father, all while being afraid. She told him of the debt that the men who attacked her had been trying to collect, a debt left by a man long gone. They were 2 lost souls, sharing their maps of heartbreak under the starlight. He saw not a victim in her, but a survivor of a different, just as brutal, war. She saw not just a monster in him, but a man who had been forced to build walls so high he'd forgotten there was a world outside of them. Days turned into weeks. The connection between them grew, a slow, steady burn that warmed the entire large house. It was in the way their hands would almost touch when he passed her a cup of coffee. It was in the long, quiet looks they shared across a room, conversations without words. It was in the feeling of safety that wrapped around Claudia when he was near, a feeling she hadn't known since she was a child herself. The kiss happened on another such evening. The house was quiet, Andrew asleep. They were in the library, and Claudia was looking at an old, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. A younger Fabrizio with a man who had the same intense eyes. "My father," Fabrizio said, coming to stand beside her. "The last good man I knew." She turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "You are a good man, Fabrizio." He shook his head, a sad smile touching his lips. "No, Claudia. I am not." "You are to me," she whispered. "You are to Andrew." The air between them crackled, charged with all the unspoken words, all the shared glances, all the slowly built trust. He lifted a hand, his fingers, usually so sure and strong, trembling slightly as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shiver through her entire body. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She rose onto her toes to meet him. Their first kiss was not a clash of passion, but a gentle discovery. It was soft and searching, a silent question and a quiet answer. His lips were warm and firm against hers, and they spoke of promises he had never made to anyone else. It was a kiss full of feeling, of gratitude, of understanding, of a deep, growing affection that was blooming in the most unlikely of places. When they finally parted, breathing each other's air, the world felt new. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Claudia," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. That kiss was the key that unlocked everything. After that, their love grew not like a wildfire, but like the strongest, deepest-rooted tree. It grew in the mornings when he'd have breakfast with Andrew, helping him with his homework. It grew in the evenings when he would hold Claudia's hand as they walked through the garden, their fingers laced together. He started to smile, a real, genuine smile that reached his stormy eyes and transformed his entire face. He knew, with a certainty that dwarfed all the power he had ever held, that he wanted this forever. He wanted to come home to her light, to the sound of Andrew's laughter. He wanted to be the man they saw when they looked at him, not a king of shadows, but a protector, a partner, a father. For the first time in his life, Fabrizio had found something worth more than all his power and riches. He had found a family, and he would move heaven and earth to keep it. Life within the stone walls of Fabrizio's estate had transformed from a refuge into a true home. The hallways, once echoing with silence, now rang with Andrew's laughter and the soft, melodic sound of Claudia's voice. For Fabrizio, every sunrise was a gift he had never thought to ask for. Waking up meant seeing Claudia's sleeping form beside him, her hair fanned out across the pillow, a picture of peace he had fought to give her. It meant hearing Andrew's eager footsteps rushing into their room on Saturday mornings, jumping onto the bed to regale them with his wild, imaginative dreams. But for Fabrizio, it wasn't enough. The title of boyfriend felt small, insignificant. It was a word for a temporary arrangement, and what he felt for Claudia and Andrew was the opposite of temporary. It was eternal. He didn't just want to share his home with them. He wanted to share his name, his life, his entire future. He wanted the world to know that Claudia was his, and he was hers, in a way that was unbreakable. He wanted to make Andrew his son, not just in heart, but in the eyes of everyone. He was planning a vow of forever. He planned it all with the same intense focus he applied to his business, but this time, the goal was joy, not power. He chose the garden, the place where they had shared so many quiet, hand-in-hand walks. He had the gardeners plant thousands of her favorite white flowers, so that as dusk fell, the entire area seemed to glow with a soft, magical light. Tiny, delicate lights were woven through the trees, mimicking the stars above. On the chosen evening, he told Claudia he had a special dinner for them. When she walked into the garden, guided by Andrew, who was practically buzzing with a secret he'd been sworn to keep, her hands flew to her mouth. The sight took her breath away. It was a scene from a fairy tale, a world of light and beauty crafted just for her. And there, in the center of it all, stood Fabrizio. The most powerful and feared man in the city looked uncharacteristically nervous. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his eyes, usually so guarded, were wide open, showing her all his love, all his hope, all his vulnerability. As she approached, he took her hands in his. They were warm and strong, the hands that had fought and built an empire, but that now held hers with such tenderness. "Claudia," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Before you and Andrew crashed into my life, my world was built of shadows. I was a king of a dark, lonely castle. You didn't just bring light into it, you brought the sun. You showed me what it means to love and to be loved. You made me a father." He glanced at Andrew, who was beaming with pride. Then he looked back at her, his gaze piercing her soul. "I don't want to just protect you. I want to belong to you. Officially. Forever." He released her hand and slowly, never breaking eye contact, lowered himself to one knee. He pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, Claudia gasped. The ring was breathtaking, a brilliant diamond set between two smaller stones, one a deep emerald, the color of her eyes, the other a sapphire, the color of his loyalty. "Claudia," he said, his voice clear and sure now, ringing through the quiet garden. "Will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me be a husband to you, and a true father to Andrew, for the rest of my life?" Tears of pure, unbridled joy streamed down Claudia's face. This was the man who had saved her, not just from danger, but from a life of loneliness. He was her shelter, her strength, her love. There was not a single doubt in her heart. "Yes," she cried out, her voice cracking with happiness. "Oh, Fabrizio, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and as he stood, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed, the sound mingling with Andrew's cheers. He kissed her then, not with the gentle softness of their first kiss, but with the full, passionate promise of their future, a deep, claiming, joyful kiss that sealed their fate. The wedding was a spectacle of love and security. It was held on the estate grounds, under a canopy of woven flowers and silk. Claudia was a vision in a simple, elegant gown, her eyes shining brighter than any diamond. And Fabrizio, standing at the altar, looked at her as if she was the only person in the world. His usual stern expression was replaced by a look of such profound love and awe that it moved many of his hardened men to discreetly wipe their eyes. The most poignant moment came when Andrew, dressed in a miniature suit, stood proudly by Fabrizio's side as his best man. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Andrew, with all the seriousness an 8-year-old could muster, piped up, "We do," pointing between himself and Fabrizio. The crowd melted, and Fabrizio placed a firm, loving hand on his shoulder, a silent promise passing between them. As Fabrizio and Claudia exchanged their vows, they spoke of second chances, of love found in the darkest of places, and of building a future together as a family. When he was told he could kiss his bride, he did so with a reverence that spoke volumes, a silent vow to cherish her every day for the rest of his life. Their happily ever after was not a boring ending, it was a vibrant, living beginning. Fabrizio was no longer the lonely king of a dark castle. He was a loving husband who brought his wife coffee in bed, a caring father who helped with math homework and attended every school play. The cold, vast house was now filled with warmth, with family movie nights, with the smell of Claudia's cooking, with the scattered toys Fabrizio would pretend to grumble about but would never actually move. Claudia's heart, once a scared, fluttering bird, was now calm and full. She was safe, she was loved, she was cherished. She used her strength not to fight off danger, but to build a beautiful life, creating a foundation of love and normalcy for her son and for the man who had become her whole world. They lived a life wrapped in a deep, unshakable love, protected by a strength that never had to be shown, and filled with the simple, profound joy of being a real family. Fabrizio had gained more than a wife and a son. He had found his soul. And Claudia and Andrew had found not just a protector, but a man whose love was as fierce and forever as the stars above their safe, happy home. They had found their forever. Did this story of a fierce protector and his found family touch your heart? If you believed in Fabrizio and Claudia's forever, subscribe to the channel for more tales of dramatic love and unexpected heroes. We love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought about their shocking love story. The night was a living, breathing enemy. Jasmine's lungs burned like fire, each gasp of the damp city air a sharp pain in her chest. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sound of heavy footsteps closing in behind her. They had found her. She had been so careful, but they had found her anyway. The narrow, cobblestone streets of the city's old town, usually so charming, were now a twisting, shadowy trap. She could hear the gruff shouts of the men, their voices echoing off the ancient stone walls, getting closer, always closer. She darted down an alley, her only thought to get to the river. It was her one chance, a dangerous, stupid chance, but her only one. The wide, dark water gleamed under the sliver of moon, its surface swirling with ominous currents. The men burst into the alley's entrance, cutting off her retreat. It was the river or nothing. With a desperate prayer, Jasmine scrambled over the low stone wall and jumped. The cold was a shock that stole the very breath from her body. It was like being plunged into liquid ice. The current, deceptively calm on the surface, was a monster underneath. It wrapped around her legs, pulling her down, twisting her in its strong, cold grasp. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but her heavy clothes were like anchors, dragging her deeper into the dark. The lights from the city blurred above her, becoming distant, winking stars. Her chest screamed for air. This was it. This was how it would end, not in a dramatic standoff, but alone and swallowed by the silent, cold dark. Constantino stood on the private balcony of his riverfront estate, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. From here, he could see everything that belonged to him. The quiet power he held was as deep and constant as the river itself. He was a man who solved problems with a word, a look, a single phone call. His world was one of controlled order, and he liked it that way. The river, tonight, was unsettled, choppy. It matched a restlessness in his own soul he couldn't quite name. A splash. Not a fish. Too big. His eyes, sharp and used to noticing every detail, scanned the water. A flail of limbs, a gasp for air that was cut short by a mouthful of water. It was a person. A woman. And she was losing the fight. He didn't think. There was no cost-benefit analysis, no calculation of risk. His body moved before his mind could catch up. The whiskey glass was set down with a quiet click. His expensive jacket was shrugged off in one smooth motion. He climbed onto the railing, a dark silhouette against the night sky, and dove. The water was a cold fist, but Constantino was strong, his muscles powering him through the current with single-minded purpose. He reached her just as she slipped beneath the surface for what he knew would be the last time. His arm hooked around her waist, pulling her limp body back against his. She was a dead weight, her skin already frighteningly cold. "Fight, damn it," he growled, though he knew she couldn't hear him. The current fought him for her, trying to claim its prize. It dragged at them, pulling them downstream. Every stroke was a battle, every kick a demand on his strength. He used all his power, every bit of his formidable will, to get them both to the shore. He finally dragged her onto the rocky bank, his own chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He rolled her onto her back. She was utterly still. Beautiful, even in the grip of death, with dark hair plastered to her face like a tragic crown. He pressed his fingers to her neck. Nothing. No pulse. No breath clouded the cold air. A panic, sharp and unfamiliar, lanced through him. He had not fought the river just to lose her here on the shore. "No," he commanded, his voice rough. "You do not get to die." He knew what he had to do. The wet, heavy fabric of her dress was a death shroud, constricting her chest. He couldn't get it off the normal way. With a sharp, brutal tear, he ripped the bodice open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. He did the same with her thin, soaked slip beneath, exposing her pale skin to the cold air. There was no time for modesty, no time for anything but the raw, desperate need to make her breathe. His large, warm hands pressed against her cold sternum, and he began CPR. The contrast of his sun-warmed skin against her icy flesh was a shock. He counted compressions, his movements firm and sure. He pinched her nose, covered her mouth with his, and breathed his own life into her. It was an intimacy more profound than any kiss, a forced sharing of his very essence. "Breathe," he ordered between breaths, his voice a low, desperate plea. "Come on, breathe for me." He went back to compressions, his hands on her bare skin. He was a man who took what he wanted, but this was different. This was about giving. Giving his strength, his warmth, his breath. A fierce, primal wave of protectiveness washed over him, so powerful it stole his own breath for a moment. He would not let her go. The world could not have her. He bent to give her another breath, and then he saw it. Just as he was about to seal his mouth over hers again, her body jerked. A violent, racking cough tore through her. Water spilled from her lips. She turned her head to the side, gasping, choking, drawing in a ragged, beautiful breath of air. Her body trembled, curling in on itself as she coughed the river from her lungs. Constantino held her shoulders, supporting her, his own heart pounding in a wild, relieved rhythm. Slowly, shakily, her eyes fluttered open. They were the color of warm honey, confused and clouded with pain and terror. They focused on him, on the stranger kneeling over her, his hands on her bare skin, his face a mask of intense concentration and raw, undisguised relief. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them on the dark riverbank. The savior and the saved, their forges now irrevocably linked. She saw the hard, handsome lines of his face, the dark, dripping hair, the eyes that held a storm of their own. He saw a flicker of life returning, a soul being pulled back from the edge. And in the depths of her wide, frightened eyes, he saw the beginning of a dangerous, unspoken question. A question that would change everything. The world returned to Jasmine in a series of disconnected sensations. The first was a crushing exhaustion that weighed down her very bones. The second was a deep, radiating warmth that enveloped her, a stark contrast to the river's icy grave. The third was the solid, unyielding strength of the arms carrying her. She was cradled against a chest as hard as stone, yet the hold was careful, almost reverent. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and through her half-closed eyelids, she saw the blur of passing marble floors and the soft glow of elegant lamps. This was not a hospital. The air smelled of old wood, fine leather, and a faint, spicy cologne that clung to her savior. Constantino moved through his home with a single-minded focus, his usual guarded composure replaced by a simmering urgency. He ignored the wide-eyed look from his elderly butler, marching straight up a sweeping staircase and into a guest room far from the main household's noise. He laid her gently on a bed softer than any cloud she could imagine, his hands lingering for a moment on her shoulders before he pulled away. He worked with a quiet efficiency that was both commanding and gentle. He wrapped her in a blanket of the finest wool, its warmth a soothing balm. But the memory of her cold, bare skin beneath his palms was a brand on his mind. He fetched a towel and began to dry her hair, his movements firm yet surprisingly tender. Each pass of the soft fabric was a quiet act of care, a language far removed from the violence he was accustomed to. Jasmine began to shiver, not from cold, but from the shock receding, leaving raw, frayed nerves in its wake. Her teeth chattered. Constantino's brow furrowed. Without a word, he sat on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip. He pulled her, blanket and all, into the circle of his arms, rubbing her back vigorously, trying to chase the last of the chill from her body. "You're safe," he murmured, the words a low, rough vibration against her ear. It wasn't a question, but a command. A promise. Just breathe. It was during this intimate act of warming her, his hand moving in slow, strong circles over the blanket covering her lower back, that his pinky finger brushed against a patch of skin on her hip, exposed by her torn clothes. The texture was wrong. Not skin but raised ink. His entire body went still. The gentle motion of his hands stopped. The air in the warm room grew thick and heavy, charged with a new, dangerous energy. Jasmine felt the change in him instantly, the shift from protector to predator. His arm, which had been a source of comfort, now felt like a steel band. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled back the edge of the blanket, just enough to reveal the small, intricate mark etched into her pale skin. It was a stylized scorpion, its tail curled ready to strike. the symbol of the Volterra family. His most hated, most bitter rival. The family he had been at war with for a decade. A low, dangerous sound rumbled in his chest. He released her as if she'd burned him, standing up so abruptly the floor seemed to shake. The kindness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness that was more terrifying than the river's depths. "A scorpion," he said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper. "You are Dante Volterra's." Jasmine pushed herself up, clutching the blanket to her chest. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her haze. But it was quickly met by a surge of defiance. She had not run from one prison to be condemned to another. "I was," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. She met his furious gaze, her honey-colored eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't expected. "I am no one's property. Not his. Not yours." "Do you have any idea what your family has done?" he snarled, taking a step closer, his large frame towering over her. "The lives they've taken? My own brother." He cut himself off, the pain in his voice raw and ancient. "And do you think you are any different?" she shot back, her own anger rising. "You think your hands are clean? I know who you are, Constantino. I know the stories. I jumped into that river to escape men just like you. My brother, his cruelty is a sickness. I refuse to be a part of it anymore. I would rather have died in that river than go back." Her words hung in the air between them, a confession and a challenge. She wasn't pleading. She was stating a fact. She had chosen death over the life they offered. Constantino stared at her, his mind reeling. He saw no lie in her eyes, only a truth as hard as diamond. He saw the same weariness, the same soul-deep stain of a violent life that he saw in his own reflection. But in her, it was coupled with a courage he rarely encountered, the courage to walk away from everything she had ever known. The anger didn't disappear, but it transformed, melting into something far more complex and dangerous. The tension in the room shifted, twisting from one of threat into a hot, magnetic pull. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with the electricity of their shared secrets, their parallel pain. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of silver in his stormy gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her heart was no longer hammering from fear, but from something else entirely, a wild, thrilling anticipation. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps I am both," she whispered back, her gaze dropping to his lips. That was all the invitation he needed. He closed the final distance between them. There was no hesitation. One of his hands came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her damp hair. The other rested on her waist, over the blanket, right above the damned tattoo. His touch was possessive, claiming, yet still held a thread of that shocking gentleness. Then his lips were on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. A deep, hungry kiss that spoke of rivers survived and secrets uncovered. It was a kiss that tasted of desperation and salvation, of danger and a terrifying, newfound desire. It was a promise and a question, all at once. Jasmine's hands, which had been clutching the blanket for dear life, let go, her arms sliding up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with a fervor that matched his own, a silent scream of defiance against the worlds that had tried to break them both. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. The storm in his eyes had quieted, replaced by a blazing, possessive light. The fear in hers had been burned away, replaced by a daring, impossible hope. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The war outside these walls, the names Volterra and his own, the decades of hatred, it all seemed to fade into a distant, meaningless noise. In this quiet, warm room, with the taste of her still on his lips, there was only her. And the dangerous, beautiful spark they had just ignited, a spark that threatened to consume them both. The days that followed were stolen from a different life, a dream woven from secret glances and the intoxicating thrill of the forbidden. Within the cold, marble walls of Constantino's mansion, a new world bloomed, a fragile ecosystem built for two. Their romance did not just ignite, it exploded into a silent, brilliant supernova, felt in every quiet corner of the vast house. They became masters of a hidden language. A brush of fingers as he passed her a cup of coffee in the sun-drenched morning room. The lingering pressure of his hand on the small of her back as he guided her through a doorway. The way his stormy eyes would find hers across the dinner table, holding a heat that made the elaborate meal entirely forgettable. Every stolen touch, every secret kiss stolen in the shadowy library, was amplified 1,000 times by the knowledge of the danger that lurked just beyond the gated grounds. Their love was a secret rebellion, and every moment felt both precious and perilous. Constantino became a man possessed by a fierce, almost primal protectiveness. He was rarely far from her side, his presence a constant, comforting shield. He, who had commanded armies of men with a flick of his wrist, now found himself ordering the kitchen to prepare her favorite pastries. He, whose name was spoken in fearful whispers across the city, would sit for hours, simply listening to her talk about the books she was reading, about her dreams of a quiet life by the sea. Jasmine, in turn, saw past the formidable mafia boss to the man beneath, a man who carried the weight of his world on his shoulders, a man who had known little but violence and suspicion. She brought out a softness in him, a capacity for gentle tenderness that no one, not even Constantino himself, knew existed. One night, a fierce storm raged outside, rattling the windows. The power in the mansion flickered and died, plunging them into a world of shadows and howling wind. Constantino found Jasmine standing by the grand window, watching the lightning split the sky. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. She leaned into him, her head resting under his chin. "It feels like the world is ending," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Let it," he murmured into her hair, his lips brushing against her temple. "As long as it ends with you right here." He turned her in his arms. In the intermittent flashes of lightning, they could see only each other. He lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that was not hungry or desperate, but deep, slow, and full of a profound, aching promise. It was a kiss that spoke of forever. In the dark, with the storm as their witness, their connection sealed itself, becoming a deep, burning love that felt as ancient as the sea and as inevitable as the tide. Later, tangled in the sheets of his bed, the room lit only by the fire he had built in the hearth, they whispered in the dark. Their conversations were no longer about the past, but about a future they dared to imagine. "There's a place in the south," Constantino said, his voice a low rumble against her skin as she lay with her head on his chest. "A small villa overlooking the sea. No one knows I own it. The walls are covered in bougainvillea, and the air smells of salt and lemons." Jasmine traced the lines of his torso with her fingertips, painting a map of their escape on his skin. "We could have a garden," she whispered, her voice dreamy. "And in the mornings we'll drink coffee on a terrace, and the only sound will be the waves. There will be no Volterras. No Constantino the boss," he said, his hand stroking her hair. "There will only be us." But their dream was a delicate soap bubble, beautiful and destined to pop. The danger was a constant, unwelcome guest. One afternoon, Constantino intercepted a communication. Dante Volterra had offered a staggering reward for information on his sister's whereabouts. The hunt had intensified. Constantino's own lieutenants were growing restless, their suspicion of the mysterious woman in their boss's home turning into a low, threatening murmur. The walls were closing in. The two most powerful families in the city were searching for them, and their secret sanctuary would not remain secret for long. The choice could no longer be postponed. Constantino found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench under a canopy of wisteria. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He sat beside her, taking both of her hands in his. His expression was grave, but his eyes were clear and resolute. "They are getting closer, Jasmine," he said, his voice low and steady. "We cannot stay." A flicker of fear crossed her face, but she squeezed his hands. "What do we do?" He looked at her, at the woman who had pulled his soul back from the brink of darkness, who had shown him that his heart was not made entirely of stone. He saw his entire future in her honey-colored eyes. "I have spent my life building an empire," he said, each word weighted with finality. "I have gathered power, wealth, and fear. I thought it was everything. But it is nothing. It is ash in my hands compared to you." He brought her fingers to his lips, kissing them softly. "I choose you," he declared, his voice gaining strength, echoing with a freedom he had never known. "I choose a life with you. I will walk away from all of it. The money, the power, the name, all of it. For you." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes, but they were tears of relief, of joy, of a love so fierce it felt like a physical force. He was giving up his kingdom for her. She leaned forward, capturing his lips in a kiss that was a seal on his vow, an acceptance of his incredible sacrifice. "Then we run," she whispered against his mouth. "Tonight." As the moon rose, casting a silver glow over the city they were leaving behind, they moved with a quiet, determined efficiency. Constantino took only a single bag, filled not with gold or jewels, but with cash and new identities. The empire he had built was now a cage, and he had found the key in her love. At the mansion's secluded back gate, he turned to her one last time. The man before her was no longer the untouchable mafia boss, but a man ready to become a ghost for the woman he loved. "Are you ready?" he asked, his hand outstretched. Jasmine placed her hand in his, their fingers lacing together perfectly. It was a fit that felt like destiny. "With you," she said, her voice steady and sure, "I am ready for anything." And as they slipped through the gate and disappeared into the welcoming darkness, they did not look back. They were choosing a wild, brave, and forever kind of love, a love that burned brighter than any empire, a love that was worth every danger, every sacrifice. Their story was just beginning. We hope you loved Jasmine and Constantino's dangerous and passionate journey. True love often demands the bravest of choices. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story. Every click we get helps us bring you more of the dramatic, spicy tales you love. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We love connecting with our global audience of romance lovers. And most of all, we want to hear your thoughts. Were you holding your breath during the river rescue? Did you feel the electric tension of their first kiss? Do you believe a love like theirs is worth giving up everything for? Tell us everything in the comments. Your feedback is what inspires our next great love story.